Welcome, everyone. Tonight is another session of our Club Excellence Workshop, and tonight you are in for a treat. So I'm your program quality director, but tonight I'll be just your tech chair. I'll manage the Zoom meeting, but Steve Chen he also the brain, I guess, mastermind behind this program, especially tonight's workshop. So Steve, go ahead and introduce yourself, and you are the MC for tonight as well. Go ahead.
Welcome, everyone. As Joy mentioned, my name is Stephen Chin. I'm an ER doctor, and I, about 12, 13 years ago, had a really bad life-changing accident where I had to learn how to walk again. I joined Toastmasters 11 years ago to learn how to tell my own story, and I've loved telling stories ever since that time. And I've even applied it to my own work as a physician and as an expert witness. Tonight, we have a panel of 5 other great storytellers that will share their stories about how storytelling has enhanced their career and how it's enriched their lives and helped those around them. I'd like to start by introducing our first panelist. Elaine Lung is a certified world-class speaking coach and co-founder of 3 Bay Area Toastmasters clubs focused on storytelling and improv. She helps professionals speak up with confidence and connect through compelling stories. Next, we have Joe Shaw, who is a nerd, a data analyst, a data architect and engineer who loves to write and tell stories. This has been a huge factor that has propelled him to the semifinals of the World Championship of Public Speaking multiple times. And he loves to share his stories that hit at 88 miles an hour and leave flaming tire tracks on your imagination. Next, we have Linda Shively, who's been featured in the Wall Street Journal, is a best-selling author, international award-winning speaker, and neuroscience and mindset expert. She's presented across the world at NASDAQ, the New York City Bar Association, and the Academy of Medicine of Mexico, the Harvard Club of Boston, Walmart, and Carnegie Hall. And stories have been a very important part of her success as well. Next, we have Nancy Geary, who is a course creation expert. She works with businesses of all sizes, from solopreneurs to Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 companies, to turn their expertise into high-profit courses. She creates engaging, fun, and interactive programs that get results. Storytelling is a big part of her secret sauce for success. Last but not least, we have Ashley Harkness, who is a longtime Toastmaster and past district governor for District 57. He's worked many years as an electrical safety trainer, and his stories have generated shocking success in his role. So I'd like to start by asking our panelists one at a time some of the questions that we have been thinking about, and we'll have a 15 to 20 minute Q&A session at the end of the panel discussion for you to ask your own questions. First of all, I'd like to start by asking you what you think is the most important ingredient of a good story. Elaine?
Hey, well, hi, Steve. Hi, everybody. And it's a pleasure to be here as one of the co-founders of the Club of Champions, San Mateo Storytellers. Woohoo!
Woo!
Previous president, I believe Nancy is a member. Is that not right? And Joe, too, I think. Our champs who went up and did great. So I'm very proud to see the success of that club. And yes, it was founded because storytelling is a key ingredient of speaking. If you want your audience, I've been told again and again, and I learned the hard way too, because I came up through Toastmasters. You can stand up and say data points till you're blue in the face, but they don't remember anything but your stories. And I found that out by the experience. So what makes a good story, I think, is what you're asking. What's a key element if you think you have one thing that makes people lean in and listen, what is it? And I suggest to you this. I think it's emotion.
Mhm.
The purpose of a story, as one of my coaches, Michael Haig, says, the purpose of a story is to elicit emotion. Is to elicit emotion. In other words, you have characters, you have an environment, you have conflict, and they're going through the conflict to get to a climax, and then an after story, after the after story, and it elicits emotion in you, the watcher, the listener. You enjoy it. You feel what they're feeling as they go through the story. So a good story needs that. And another simple way to say this is that a character at the beginning of the story has a certain emotion, and then by the time the character gets to the end of the story, or even in a scene anyway, by the time they get to the end of the story, the emotion has to be different. If there's no change in the character emotion or situation, there's no story. So that kind of boils it down, and you can see that. So in a nutshell, I would say, Steve, emotion.
That's a tough answer to follow. So I'm going to throw it to Joe.
Anyone can elaborate on it. Just flesh it out. Bare bones that way.
Gee, thanks, Stephen. Thank you for giving me that opportunity. Thanks for having me here, everybody. My name is Joe. I am a former, I don't know, kind of current member of San Mateo Storytellers. I live in Florida, so I've never actually been there in person, but I joined in 2020 during the pandemic and just kept on coming for a while because it was such an awesome club. I would say that my most important connection in a story is myself. So for you telling your stories, that would be you. And my first experience with Toastmaster speech contest is what taught me that. It was probably 2010, 2011. I had been a writer for several years before this. I had written a couple small things, a comic book, a couple of plays, a couple other things. And I knew that I'm probably, as far as writing was concerned, was better than most of the people in the club. And I went into the speech contest going, okay, this is kind of what a speech contest is. This is what people expect. And I wrote what was a perfectly serviceable speech for the humorous speech contest. And I finished 5th out of 5. And the person who finished 4th didn't really even speak English. Now, that's not to disparage anybody who for English is not their natural language. That's fine. I always kind of look at that from my perspective as people who can do magic, like the ability to speak 2 languages just completely confuses me. So that's all well and good. But for me, I went and talked to one of my mentors in the club and said, what happened? I've always done well in my speeches. And she says, yeah, but it wasn't you up there. I had written this speech making fun of Santa being available and like coming up in stores in the middle of July and just talking about Santa being too ubiquitous throughout the year. But I love Christmas, so it really wasn't me in the speech. And I learned in that lesson that you need to have you in the speech that you're doing. It's very easy to write a speech that you think is going to win a speech contest or write a story that you think is going to sell a lot, but you're ultimately going to be more successful and more fulfilled if you're telling stories that are about you and where you are and where your mind is and where your feelings are. That's the way you're going to be successful long term. You might find some small success trying to chase the trends, but long term, it's going to be a lot better to have you in it. So that's mine.
Thanks, Joe. Just to clarify, I think what you're saying is it's best to be authentic and speak from the heart. Is that about right?
Yeah, but those are more words. You is a lot shorter.
Great. Thanks, Joe. All right. Next up, Linda, what are your thoughts? What's the best ingredient of a great story?
Founding member of San Mateo Storytellers. I guess we have many representatives here. Dialogue is a key ingredient in stories because we can talk about what happened, but dialogue immediately brings us into the moment. And you can condense a lot of what you're saying into a very short sentence and convey or phrase and get a lot. It, like Elaine was talking about, you can convey the emotion. You can be yourself by using the words that you would say or the words that somebody else would say, but in conversation, perhaps with you. And that is a way to immediately bring people into the moment. And so having the dialogue can really impact it. And I think I could go on. There's so many key elements of a story, but when we said pick one, I'm going to go with dialogue. And I'll let
Thank you,
the next
Linda.
person go. Yeah.
Well, I guess we're running out of good answers here, but I think so. I feel bad for the latter people, but I'm going to be the last to talk about this. So I'll leave it to you, Nancy.
Thank you. Well, really great ideas have been shared so far. And I want to just suggest that storytelling has been the best way of teaching, going as far back into time as possible, back to cave drawings on walls and people are around the fire. And you had, people that couldn't read, so they told stories. And the thing about a story, and I particularly see this when I'm working in creating learning programs, is that the story is the anchor to the key point. People remember the story, which then triggers them to remember what the key idea is. So if you have a key idea that you're trying to convey, a story is the best way to do that. Oops, sorry, my heater was making was smelling like it shouldn't. I was like, that's not good. So I got distracted there for a minute. I didn't want to burn my house down. That could be a story right there. And it's, I think, when we're willing to show up, as Joe was saying, to be who we are and to be vulnerable, because who doesn't love the flawed but lovable character? Because we're all flawed in some way and we're all also lovable in some way.
That's great. And that's, I think it kind of goes to making them care about you and your story. When you're vulnerable, that really does that. So thank you, Nancy. Well, Ashley, we're down to you. What do you think is the most important ingredient of a great story?
I think you have to believe in the character that you've created to carry the emotion of what's going on and hook the audience. That first opening for whatever that character is doing is going to be the harbinger of the success of your story. If that particular character is doing something that even resonates with your own life somewhere or some small part, you're going to be hooked. And the key point to that is they will stay because they're curious to see how much they are really like them and what the adventure is going to be. So I think the most important part of it is how you set up that first characterization and introduce that individual and then take it on from there.
That's great. That's great, Ashley. And, I think that whether the story is true or not true, whether it's fictional or not, the most important thing is that you make them believe, because once they believe, they get into the story. So to me, the first rule of storytelling is to show rather than tell. And if you show them in such a way that they can actually paint a picture in their mind of what you're talking about and follow it vividly, then they will care. So that's my kind of overall ingredient, which touches on what all our previous panelists have discussed on this. You want to show them, you want to bring them in. So, and be part of let them live through what you're talking about, what you're showing them. So that's great. So our next question is, how has storytelling impacted your career? And how do you use it in what you do? Elaine?
Hey, Steve, I just want to suggest something if you're open to it.
Sure.
Mix it up a little and start with someone else. So it's not the same lineup each time. What do you guys think? That sound cool?
Okay.
You have to keep track of it.
Well, just start with Joe and then
Okay.
start next with Lynn,
Okay. I'll mix it up more. Okay.
All right.
So
Just
why don't I
all
start
right,
with
thank you.
why don't we start with Nancy?
And the question again, please.
And the question is,
how have you utilized storytelling in your career, and how has it impacted your life?
Well, I use it every day because as I mentioned before, I'm creating learning programs for businesses of all sizes. So to give you an example, right now I'm working on a course and it's all basic math. So, and it's for people that they're high school graduates, they're just starting a job working for a big oil company, and they're going to have to be able to do some perform mathematical functions. They may or may not, been paying attention in school. So there could be some holes in their education. Now we could just put them through and say, go through, and now you're going to do fractions, you're going to do decimals, now you're going to do square roots, now you're going to solve for variables, blah, 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 blah. And they won't pay attention. So what I thought about doing is, I'm going to build a whole story around it, and it's all going to be tied into a road trip. So I'm going to teach the content in the context of a road trip. And by the way, I'll tell you who the company is. They'll be stopping at ExxonMobil gas stations along the way. So I'll be able to bring in the company branding. I'll be able to teach them the skills, and in a way that it's going to be more memorable. And they're not going to be like, oh my God, what do I have to do this for? So that's just one place that it shows up. And it makes such a huge difference because, again, that's what's going to drive people to remember. They're going to be able to pass the test. They're going to be able to, move on through the next exciting course, which will be about gas laws. And I know that will be very fun to figure out how to do that. So, but that's, it's just always there. It's always present. I always think about, how can I do this in a way that's not just going to be an information dump? Because so often that's what happens in the corporate world. I'm going to bore you to death with charts and graphs and just processes, and there's no context. There's nothing to relate it to. They can't hook it to anything else in their head to be able to actually do more than pass the test in the moment. So that's my great story, and I'm sticking to it.
That's great. And storytelling is one of the best ways to keep your audience engaged. I totally agree. Next, we'll go with Linda.
Stories are things that people remember. And like we talked about earlier, back cave drawings, that was the way to convey information. Like Nancy's saying, it's the way to teach, because whatever concept that may be abstract, how do you relate it to somebody else? And I use it whether I'm presenting information to a group in a speech, whether I'm talking one-on-one to either a current client or somebody who is looking for coaching, because I can give examples, not just of, oh, this works because I've seen it work. No, I can tell a story about how Mary Jean transformed because she wasn't able to do anything except care for other people. And now through the work we've done, she's able to really take time for herself. And even though she may have similar challenges, she's able to adapt better because she can handle the challenges in her life more effectively because of the coaching that we've done. And that's something that's a little bit easier to talk about than just, these are results that I've gotten. And when I've heard people come back to me and say, I still remember the story you told me at Toastmasters 10 years ago, and it's impressive. And like you, Steve, I joined Toastmasters because I love to speak and I wanted to figure out how to tell my story better. And that's what I've been able to do. And that has helped me grow my business and speak all over. And now when I learn other people's stories around content that I have, I can begin to share those stories as well. And when you're writing a book, anything, you know, we're here talking about Toastmasters, so we're talking about speaking, but it also conveys in writing.
Yep, and I totally agree. That's I'm still working on writing my story. Next, why don't we go with Ashley?
Well, early on in my Toastmaster experience, I was asked to be the keynote speaker at a conference. The conference was the Northern California Pressure Vessel and Boiler Inspectors Association. Yes, thank you very much, Joy. And it was the guy that I got this job from. He had the president of the association call me up, and he said, "Well, just what do you think you can talk to us about?" And I said, "Well," and I told him this quick story. When I was in the Air Force, one of my jobs was to take the air tank off of an air compressor and fill it up with water and then pressurize it to 10,000 pounds and beat on the welds with a sledgehammer. He said, "My God, you're one of us, and you have to tell that story." And I did. And so a person who had nothing to do with their association got to come in and introduce myself and tell that story, and then take it on to the next step, which was what they should expect to be doing in this conference and what we expected from them as inspectors. In other words, you never tear off the red tag if it really belongs there. You do your job properly, because that's the same thing as beating on a drum that might blow up on you. Had water in it. It all it did was just break. But that's what I did. And that story got me into and accepted by the Inspectors Association. They didn't ask me to join, however, but maybe they thought I was going to hit the thing too much with the hammers. But it taught me to really find something that would reach into their core experience. And once I had done that and established my own credibility just for that small thing, they were willing to listen to me talk about how they can't turn away from inspecting any of the buildings they're in or anything like that, or take a second rating because they're protecting people's lives. It worked.
Thanks, Ashley. Next, Joe, how do you use storytelling in your career and in your life?
So I'm an engineer, a data engineer. So we are what I like to call the boring side of IT. If Nancy said that people bore people to death with graphs and charts, we do that professionally. We bore people to death professionally. And one of the biggest struggles that a lot of people in IT have is the ability to communicate what it is that we do and why it matters to a lot of people who don't have really any understanding of what it is that we do. And it's really hard for IT people to say, I'm speaking in acronyms and code and you're speaking in English and we're just not connecting. One of the things I do with my orgs and my teams is I teach them frameworks of storytelling. I talk about what it means to tell a story, what the different parts of a story are, why you need to have change, why you need to have adversity in a story to make things interesting. And you can reflect those into the way that you do your work. If you're building a report or a dashboard, if you're building an IT system, it's very easy to get lost in the particulars. But if you tell people, hey, right now we're stuck in this problem where we can't figure out how to get things to integrate, or we can't figure out why people aren't interacting with the stuff that we're building. These are the obstacles that we have to overcome in the story that we're telling with this project that we're working on. If we want people to be able to interact with our dashboards, we need to say, how can we make it more interesting than just a bar chart and a line graph? One example would be we had a financial forecasting system for the accounting department. You want to talk about boring on steroids? That's what it was. What we did is we ended up turning it into, now I work for the Walt Disney Company, so we can use a lot of their IP. And we use the framework of the Phineas and Ferb television show. If anybody's ever seen that, if you have, it's a kids television show, which is one of those shows that's fun to watch as an adult as well. Well, we built our system as if it was a video game within that universe. And as you're forecasting your dollars for the year, you're playing a video game to keep the bad guy from stealing all your money. It was a little bit extra work for us, but the usability of it shot up, and it was very effective in being able to manage the money that we use to do the stuff that we do. Now, that's boring stuff to talk about, but the end result is it saved a ton of money. It made us feel like we were doing something that mattered because it did, and it allowed people to see that if you look at your job, if you look at the work that you're doing, if you look at your career and you look at your life in the framework of a story, it becomes a lot more meaningful and it gives you a lot more direction. So that's one of the reasons why I like to do it, because beyond just the joy of telling a story, it actually is useful in many aspects of life.
Awesome. Thank you, Joe. And Elaine.
Okay. Touching on a few things that have been said already, I teach different ages of students, and some of my students are very young. And I thought, why should I tell a story? Let's just go through the principles and get them talking and get them to practice what I'm teaching. However, I found this. When I told a story about how I was afraid to talk, because I joined Toastmasters in my quite well into my career because I was terrified of speaking. And as a child, I also did not enjoy speaking, so I avoided it. So I told a story about how I failed and then how I succeeded. I overcame that fear eventually. And the parents said, wow, we heard that story. That's amazing. The kids told us that story. And I thought, wow, I've been discounting the impact of my ability to connect and motivate some shy kids to take a step and try something harder. So we teach what we need to learn, and for sure I'm learning as I go, but this impact of a story to teach and motivate and be memorable, it's what everyone who gets up and speaks, hopefully we want to impact lives. We don't just want to stand there and be talking for the purpose of talking. We want to impact the lives of the people that we're talking to. And stories have done that for my career like nothing else.
That's fantastic. Thank you, Elaine. For myself, I'm an ER doctor. I never thought that storytelling would be that important for what I do, because really, for the really critical patients in my life, they can't even hear what I'm saying. They're unconscious. But for my day-to-day patients, I think storytelling gives me credibility. And it's one thing to tell a patient that you want them to do something because you want to avoid going blind. But it's quite another when you actually tell them a story, share a story about someone else who had the same problem and followed your advice or didn't follow your advice, and what happened. Like, oh, they went blind. And they're like, oh, I don't want that to happen to me. So like, it actually gives me credibility. And that same credibility I take to the courtroom, because it's one thing to listen to an expert talk about their credentials, their degrees and everything, but it's quite another to actually hear them bring you into a story and convince you. It gives me greater credibility than my credentials. So I think that it's very motivating, very convincing, and it wins people over. So storytelling has made a much greater difference in my life than I ever imagined. So my next question for you guys is, what opportunities have you found because of storytelling? What new heights have you gone to because you use storytelling? Linda?
Speak all over the world in places I never would have thought I could speak. And that is all because I can tell a story. and being able to bring people in allows them to just step into your world for a moment. And when told well, or even maybe not perfectly well, they might keep that story for a very long time. And I think that's an essence of what each of us has brought up here, is the story is what makes it memorable. Because in a speech, everybody here has listened to speeches, right? How many of them do you actually remember? And the ones that you do remember, you probably don't remember the whole thing. It's the story that you remember. Or maybe there's a phrase or a dialogue that you remember within the story. And having seen people and started incorporating some of the act out type of stories, so like utilizing the stage and moving around intentionally, that can also bring people into a story if you're delivering it in a way that you can do that. Sometimes when we're in these little rectangles on a screen, you can move a little bit, but it may not be the same extent as when you're in 3 dimensions. So I find that storytelling, there's, now I don't remember who said it, but you don't need, it's like you don't need to include humor, you don't need to include stories unless you want to get paid. So so I would love to credit that, but I've heard it from several people. So it's just, it matters. It really does matter. And I think our brains are wired to understand story. And some people have brains that are wired to understand the facts and the figures. But even the people whose brains are wired to understand facts and figures understand story.
Great. Ashley, what do you think?
Well, there have been times when if I didn't come up with a story, either by creating it or just reciting something I already knew, I was never going to establish any relationship with the person I was dealing with. Very often the hero of the story was not really a hero, it was a guy who was a stumbling person, myself. And that allowed the other person to compare themselves and say, oh, this guy's just like me. Or this person can follow along the same thing. But I've always found stories to be the opener to perhaps a lasting friendship, especially if it's a personal story where maybe I had to suffer a little bit, maybe had to grow a little bit, or maybe not. Who knows? It depends on the situation. But I found when I was in the Air Force, it was easy to tell stories to people because they expected to hear them. Everybody had a story to tell about where they'd been and what they'd been doing. But that's just like a travelogue. When you start getting into some of the things you had to do and where you had to go, people say, I can understand that. And pretty soon they open up. So starting a friendship by telling a story seems to be a very good way to get into somebody in a way they didn't expect and something that they weren't afraid of to be involved in. I go on and on about that. But half the time I make up the stories as I go because, people will say, did that really happen? And in one story, I told about a boy who was too shy to ask a girl to the dance. And at the end, of course, he did. He was the hero. And it was in a class of high school freshmen. That's why I picked the thing, because I knew that was something they were involved in. And one of them at the end said, is that a real story? And I said, wow, if it isn't, it should be. And they all broke up and they realized, wow, really, it could be mine. So I turned a story that I'd really made up into something that they could see for themselves and make themselves the hero of the story or the heroine. It was a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. Everybody got all excited too. Is that a real story?
That's great. Because that's how you connect with your audience. That's great. Nancy, what opportunities have you found because of storytelling?
Well, I had a very interesting thing happen to me last week. I had written an article for a blog that a good friend and colleague of mine that owns a bookkeeping firm runs, about what is a fractional chief learning officer. And before that, or at some point there before or after that, she then told a story about me and how much I had helped her. Someone was out doing a Google search for fractional chief learning officer, and they landed on that page. And they read the article, and they told me that it wasn't as much about what I wrote, but about how Enzo had written about how much I had helped her. And they hired me today, and it's one of the biggest contracts I've gotten in a very long time. And it all ties into, it wasn't me telling the story, but somebody telling the story about me. Now, certainly I had little examples throughout that article, but the fact that she told the story about how I helped her. And I think when we have stories, whether we tell them or somebody else tells them about us, where we're not the hero, but we're the fairy godmother. We're the person off to the side that helped make whatever possible for someone else. In many ways, those are the most powerful, because sometimes some of the stories that are hero-based, it's the person that, they climbed Mount Everest on one leg and they were blind, or they, all these different things, and it's like, and people in the audience, they're like, well, yeah, great. All right. I was kidnapped and I was hijacked on a plane, and, they're powerful. They make great film, but they're not necessarily, they're not as relatable. And I think people are looking for something that, well, that's great. You got to have like, hey, I accomplished this and you can too. So like, how do you create like those, extreme sports stories and all those, there's very powerful stories. And how then can you take something like that down to somebody who can say, well, how can I apply what you did? So.
Oh, that's great. That's a great story. That's a great story.
I can't even believe, because, we put stuff out there, praying something's going to happen, and something finally did.
It's a great story, and it's even greater because it's true.
Yeah, it's very true. And it sounds like they pay on time. So
Elaine, what opportunities have you found because of storytelling?
Just kind of the same as what everyone's been saying, but once you learn how to tell a story, once you learn the pieces and put it together and start telling a story that's compelling, you become not only as you speak what you speak about, an expert in your field, and you become entertaining about speaking about what you're an expert about. And just like Joe said, boring, dry topics. Nancy, boring, dry topics. Ashley, boring, dry topics. Linda, it's like very abstract and esoteric topics. People start connecting with you on the experience of your stories, and they want to hear it more from you. And they also, believe it or not, want to hear you tell your story again, because it was fun. And it was fun for you to tell it, yes, but it was fun for them to sit there and experience it and get that emotional high from it. Watching the character, right, the hero's story, watching the hero climb the mountain and achieve victory. It became, again, example from real life for me. I do improv workshops. So I go around telling people about improv. Here's what it is. If you didn't know, here's how you would apply it to speaking and leadership and team building, right? And let's do some exercises and see the application and and experience it. Well, usually that's pretty intense and people enjoy it, and that's enough. But at the end of one guy who had been the key contact to bring me into this organization said, "Oh, you can't leave without telling the story about the admin like you did when I saw you, when we first met." And I was like, wow, okay. I had no idea I was that entertaining and exciting. So it will open your eyes. The more stories you tell, it will open your eyes how people will remember you for that. And they'll want you to retell it so they can relive it. It's fun for everyone when you can do that.
Fantastic. Great. Joe, what about you? What opportunities have you found because of storytelling?
Well, I think the easy ones to start off with are the opportunity to speak again, the opportunity to write again, the opportunity to do well in the international speech contest or humor speech contest, or, finish better than fifth in the speech contest. But for me, I believe that from the stories we tell, there are tendrils of influence that go out through the world and throughout time, and we don't always get to see those. But sometimes you do, and that for me is the opportunity I like the most. A few years ago, I competed in the International Speech Contest through District 4 and finished second at the International Speech Contest to Mr. Stephen Chin, who finished first place, which was it was a great contest, and I was very happy for him. I just like to rib him every time I see him. But a couple of years after that, so maybe a year or two ago, I got an email from a guy who said that he had been in prison in Ohio, and the pastor came and told this story that was my story from my speech contest. He had been at the contest online and he'd heard the story and he'd shared it. It was about forgiveness. And for him, that story was life-changing for him. It taught him that there is forgiveness for people making mistakes and that he could live his life differently. And he had heard my name and he wanted to reach out to me and just let me know. And it's not money. It's not an opportunity to speak. It's not any kind of fame. But it is a big impact that I get to see in somebody's life. I help somebody kind of get out of jail, which is an amazing thing, and turn their life around. And my first response, in my mind at least, was, man, imagine if he'd heard Stephen's speech. What could he have done from that? He could have been president. But I do love to hear those kind of things when a thing that you put a lot of heart and energy and effort into means something to somebody else. Not just, oh, that was interesting. It's, wow, that really meant something to me. And they're going to carry that with them. That's exactly what you want as a storyteller. And when you get to see that for me is the opportunity that I enjoy the most.
Thanks, Joe. Just for clarification, on how close it was at the district contests, Joe beat me with that same speech at the club level that year.
That just means you worked harder. That's all that means.
So for me, as an expert witness, the stories are really what, as I mentioned, give me credibility. And because I can tell a good story that can convince the jury that what I'm saying is right, when the opposing attorney is just talking about their experts are working on the technicalities of why they're right, I convince them that, look, they were supposed to know how to do this and they didn't. And this was their job and this is the result. And impacting them with what the results of their failure to act was. So it gives me a lot of credibility. And when I can convince people like that, the attorneys who see me in action, they come back for more. And it's giving me a lot more opportunities. And that's why my expert witness work has actually grown to the point where it's more than 50% of what my regular job is. So I was just doing this on the side. But it's amazing. And the storytelling, as Joe said, I don't really care as much about winning an award. It's a great honor to get to the World Championship of Public Speaking. But what impacted me more when I got to the World Championship of Public Speaking was when one of the semifinalists came up to me, they contacted me and said that my speech moved them. And they just told me that they were very moved. And to me, that's more valuable than any trophy. So I think that's why I still love storytelling, because you can leave a lasting impression with your audience. So I think we're pretty much out of time for more questions. We'll start with I think we'll open with the Q&A session. Does that sound good, everyone? Unless, do any of the panelists have anything else you want to add before we go into the Q&A? All right. So let me see. If you guys have questions you want to pose, I think I'll look in the chat. Let me see. Let me see. There's a question that, I don't know, is there, are there any questions from the audience? I'm not sure I'm seeing any questions for us to talk about yet. Oh, Karen Schaff wants to hear my life-changing story. It's a little long, but I can mention it for you guys real quick. About almost 13 years ago now. I mean, I was an avid cyclist, and I rode my bike like over 100 miles a week. And one day I was riding my bike and a deer jumped out in front of me while I was racing down a hill. And the impact destroyed my bike and almost destroyed me. I was paralyzed from the shoulders down and had to learn how to walk again after 2 spinal surgeries. I wasn't sure if I'd ever work as a doctor again. Because at the time I was having trouble just feeding myself. So I would have to say it's a very humbling experience. And I think about that day, and sometimes I forget still that I really came that close to death. But each day, especially if I'm reminded about that day, I thank God for the day that I have, and I want to make the most of it and do the most that I can for myself, my family, for the people I love, and for those other people in my life that I care about. So that's my story, briefly. Those of you who've been in San Mateo Storytellers with me, they know the more detailed story, but that's the gist of it. I'm thankful to be alive, and storytelling is sort of my way of giving back. So it's just one of the many ways. Let's see.
I think Sammy raised his hand for a while.
Okay. Sammy, what's your question?
Thank you very much. This was very insightful and inspiring. And the question I have is for Joe. Regarding data storytelling, I also work in ED, emergency department data, clinical kind of work. And one of the things that I have been navigating is data storytelling. Do you have any kind of pathways, I say, to help out to turn? I'm good with my numbers, but telling the story has been always a struggle. So if you can give some insight, that would be helpful.
Sure, I'll try to give a brief one without being a little bit too overly, complicated. But one of the things you'll see a lot in a lot of data conferences, a lot of engineering conferences, is when you're building your dashboard, you can make your visualizations look this way with stories. And that's far too limited, because that doesn't really give you the story of what's going on and what you're trying to report on. What I think you need to focus on is the stories that are going on within the teams that you're reporting on. Why are we experiencing some of these things? Why does the data look this way? And then you can ask, that guides you to ask the right types of questions. As you're asking those questions, you can look at what are the stories that people are dealing with in the work that they do, in the problems that they're facing, what are the obstacles they're looking to overcome, How have they changed over the last few years? That gives you all the kind of insight that everybody who's building data solutions really need to know in order to do something that's very effective. So I like to understand the mechanics of telling a story. I like to look at a lot of the different people who have different frameworks for storytelling, all the way back to Aristotle and Socrates up to current day. Dan Harmon with his Rick and Morty, he has a good storytelling framework. Even the guys who do South Park have a very simplistic storytelling framework that keeps things focused on what the message is. You learn about those different frameworks of storytelling, you can apply them to the way you run your project. It allows you to get all the requirements, all the understanding, and then actually be able to meet the needs that they don't know that they have when you're building out some kind of dashboard or system. And if you can think about it creatively, then you can be creative and do something like a video game or some really cool pictures that are engaging for the dashboards that you're building, or even just how do we run this team that we're working on right now, and what are their stories and how can I help them? It's much broader than just, hey, let's make these line graphs have some cool pictures on them, and then that's data storytelling. Most people who do data storytelling have no idea what they're doing. So if you can focus on the frameworks of storytelling and apply those to every aspect of what you're doing in your area, you'll have a lot more insight and a lot more effectiveness in what you're doing.
Thanks, Joe.
Welcome.
Victor had a question also. Are there any resources on storytelling that you can recommend? I'll leave it open to all the panelists. There's a lot of resources out there, but I'll leave it to any of the panelists who want to step up first. On storytelling resources, Nancy?
Well, I'm a big fan of Kelly Swanson. I think she's an incredibly gifted storyteller. And she has something she calls a storytelling academy that you can join for a year. And you get one free coaching, not free, but one coaching session with her, as well as she holds office hours. And you have 15 minutes and you come in and say, here's what I'm working on. And she works with you to improve it. And that's very useful. I met somebody last week. Her name is Melissa Reeves. And she calls it the movie mind method of storytelling. And she's written a book that is quite interesting. And a lot of what she does falls into the data story. I need more water. The data storytelling place. I'll try to find the book now and I'll post it in the chat.
Awesome. Ashley, did you have something to add?
Yes, a long time ago, I started reading a lot of international short stories. There were some magazines that specialized in them, and they might be 5, 10, 15 pages from all over different places of the world. The ideas that I saw out of that was not only how they present the stories, but you learn a little bit about different cultures and how they interact. I thought that was a very useful background. Not that I always went there, but when I went to Japan and learned a lot about their Japanese stories, it seemed to fit better. So I like to say, get a wide variety of things that you've read.
That's great. No, that's great. I mean, depending on the culture, audiences respond very differently. So, but if you can coordinate them with something that everyone can connect with, like love, death, things like that, that's pretty universal. So, and it looks like Elaine has posted Kelly Swanson's link. Elaine, did you want to add something else?
Yeah, I mentioned this guy before. I'm fuzzy. Let me unfuzz myself. There we go. Michael Hagg's. This is his 6-step success stories. Great addition to where I started, which was Craig Valentine. And he's got a storytelling for speakers course that I cut my teeth on. And then I graduated to Story Mastery with Michael Hegg. He's got a book. He's got things online. Terrific. Both highly recommend both.
Awesome. Awesome. Anyone else?
Well, I was going to post it in there, but I'll post it when I'm done. There are 3 books that I really like to read. One is called The Anatomy of Story by John Truby. It's good. It's just looking at the different frameworks that I was talking about. Another one is Story by Robert McKee. Robert McKee was a screenwriter and producer and helped all kinds of people write screenplays for TV shows and movies. He's kind of considered the godfather of screenwriting. And then one of my favorite books, and you might discount it some, but it's On Writing by Stephen King. Stephen King, he became popular for a reason, and he was an English teacher before he was Stephen King. And On Writing is a great look into not only the ability to write a story, but how it sits in your life. So it's three good resources that I like.
That's great. That's great. All right. I think we're going to move on to, and Joy, we were capturing the chat on the recording, right? Awesome. Okay. So I think we had a question from Pavani. Not everything may fit into a story. In those cases, do you have any tips on how to still make them memorable? For example, we often hear that a picture's worth 1,000 words or speaks 1,000 words.
I would say one of my favorite writers is Kurt Vonnegut. And one of the rules that he had when he was writing was, I'll write whatever I want to write my first time. Everything that comes to mind, I write it. Then I cut it by at least a third, and then I cut that by at least a third. And what I have found in doing that is that it really forces you to focus on what matters in your story. And a lot of those great things that you love, they might be great pieces of writing. They might be very beautiful, but they don't matter for the story. They don't matter for the message. Your theme could be about one thing, and that was a part of another idea that you had that just doesn't fit. Put that into a notepad, keep it for something later, but focus on what matters about your story. Make it as streamlined as possible, and that's when it becomes memorable. And a lot of times what you expected to be memorable is not what ends up being memorable. So allow yourself to cut as much as you can from your story so that it will be memorable.
Sometimes you have to kill your darlings.
That's the quote I was thinking of. Thank you. You and I get along so well. That's awesome.
You're the best line.
There's also a question from, does anyone else have anything else?
Yeah, real quick. When you're trying to create a story and you don't know, is this a story or not? Well, the story spine's a nice little tool to get all the parts in it and in a row. It's like a checklist. But Bhavani, it can be as short. This is an improv technique. It can be very short, right? 2 minutes. It's a table topic, 1 minute even, or it can be as long as a movie, because Pixar uses the story spine to create things like Toy Story.
That's great. Yeah. That's the thing spine.
Yeah, you can tell a story in a sentence.
Mm-hmm.
So it doesn't, anything can be created into a story. It's just how much detail there is and how much time you have to cover it.
That's great.
I would think you could look at what you're working on and challenge yourself to say, is there a story, whether it's one sentence, as Linda said, or longer form? Is there a story that connects to this idea? Can I convey this idea through a story? And certainly, sometimes you mentioned about, the picture is worth 1,000 words. Bringing up a powerful visual is going to evoke different things in people. I'm in a writing group, and the instructor will put up a picture, and we'll all write what we see in the picture. We all see it differently. So when you do bring in a picture, you've got to say, well, what is your point of view on that picture? Why did you choose, how is that picture advancing your speech?
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, Joe, that's beautiful what you just posted. Yeah.
My feeling is that basically before you start writing a story, you start with the end in mind. And the important thing is the message. And what's the message of your story? If you focus on just what's the message of the story, then think about what makes that message important and memorable to you. And if you can build around that. So, but just boil it down to what's the message, what you're trying to get across. I think we had a question from Jim on how to lighten a heavy story. I mean, obviously, Nancy, you would be kind of a pro at that because you're into the humor, right? But that's the obvious answer. But or Nancy, you want to talk about that more?
Yeah, just throw something out there and then hand it off to Linda. I think even in some of the most difficult moments, you know, there is an opportunity to bring lightness to it. You cannot keep people down in a very heavy place for very long. I think about it's an older movie, Slumdog Millionaire. You'd be going along and it'd be like, oh, and then something funny would happen, like the kids were given a tour of the Taj Mahal, you know, and making money doing that, because when they were telling that story, they knew that yes, there was a lot of powerful things that were going on, but they had to bring us up every now and then, or we wouldn't be able to take it. I tell a story about when my brother died, and the thing that healed our family was when my cousins came and they started just telling jokes, joke after joke after joke. And remember this story, remember that story, and they had everybody laughing. And because we were able to laugh, we knew we were going to be okay. So
it's very touching.
Linda.
Sometimes there is at least part of the story that is hard, and you don't want to, what's the word? You don't want to just throw in a joke, but how can you uncover something that was funny in it? And it may be that there is something that the arc of that is down, but then you have to bring them back up again. And so, you know, I think Nancy, I talk about the death of my daughter, and, you know, but what that meant to me and what I've taken from it. And so, yes, it was a sad event, but now what, you know, the arc of the story is about me and where I have come in that journey. And so finding what the whole arc is that you want to talk about, and finding ways to move the audience. I don't know if that helps, but I know we're a little bit over time.
Bringing them up. That's wonderful. And I totally agree that when you bring them down, you got to bring them back up. And humor is the easy way. It's the most obvious, but any positive emotion that will bring them up is good, whether it's humor or something like love, something that makes people feel warm, fuzzy, touched. It'll bring them up and keep them engaged. So thank you everyone for joining us tonight, and thank you to our fantastic panelists. As I've said, these are the best storytellers in our district, and they've demonstrated it already for you guys. So I really appreciate all your contributions. Nancy, Joe, Linda, Elaine, Ashley, you've done a great job, and I hope that you'll come out and do some more storytelling with us sometime soon. For all our guests out there, if you want to learn more about storytelling, we've got some great storytelling clubs in the district and even outside our district. So just look us up. There's San Francisco Storytellers, San Mateo Storytellers, Silicon Valley Storytellers, and
San Francisco, I think, has San Francisco Storytellers.
Yeah, I said San Francisco Storytellers and San Mateo Storytellers and Silicon Valley Storytellers are the ones I can think of off the top of my head. But there's other storytelling clubs as well. So just look us up, and if you want to learn more, come on out and visit us and think about joining. All right. Thank you, everyone. And I will close it at this.
Thank you. Okay, I'll close that too.
Great job, guys.
Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.